Hey Ben, welcome to the interview here. So this is advertising alpha, and the idea is alpha is in the finance sense. So what's a kind of asymmetrical information that you might have that you're applying in the work that you do for e-commerce brands or email marketing, SMS in general? And the intention of this is to really talk in the weeds in terms of what you're doing to actually provide good information and not really talk to a bunch of conjecture or fluff. So with that, we have Ben, and Ben's been in performance marketing for almost a decade. He's worked with six different startups and has now founded two businesses. And the most recent one being a newsletter growth service called Forward Newsletters, which is absolutely taking off this year. So, Ben, super happy to have you and really interested in talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Hal.
Awesome. So the way this works, it's only three questions. We're going to try to have about 10 minutes per question and really just want you to answer as candidly as you can and speak into as much nuance and detail as you want to. We really want to dig into these concepts. So the first question is, what's the biggest lie that you've seen on direct-to-consumer Twitter about email and text marketing, retention in general? Like, where are most people wrong? Where's the kind of BS factor that's happening right now?
I would say, like, at least in my head for email and SMS for e-commerce, I think the biggest myth is that it's lifecycle/retention marketing. A lot of people in the space will sort of brand themselves that way. I personally disagree with it completely. Like, does email help you get repurchases? Of course. And like, does SMS help you get repurchases? For sure. But it's like, so does ads. And like ads also operates kind of as part of the ecosystem for repurchases. And I think similarly, at least this might seem like a semantic argument, but the thought that like, okay, like, we have whatever. Let's say a brand is new and they have like 100 customers and they say, well, we need to run ads to get more customers. And like, we'll worry about email 2 years from now. That's just like, it makes sense maybe to invest at email at different levels, at different stages of revenue, but it always makes sense to at least have some type of thing set up for email. I tell brands all the time that are getting started, like, at least put up a pop-up and have a couple of the basic flows and at least push like one campaign per month, even if you're super small, because it's email when done correctly is a key part of acquisition and actually reducing customer acquisition costs. That's my perspective on it. And that's actually what I think is the kind of the highest value of email, where it's like, if let's just say hypothetically you're further along and maybe you have 10,000 customers in your database, how many of those customers might repurchase in a 30, 60, 90, 12-month window? A certain percentage of them will, maybe 30%, 40%, and email can certainly help, bring those customers back for repurchases. Depends on the product and the AOV and everything, of course. But where I think email really helps brands grow is as a key component of customer acquisition. So the way I think about it is advertising is sending traffic to the website. If the website's well optimized, it's converting a decent amount of the time, right? And then email is about like collecting data from that traffic. But then when you're collecting email addresses off of like pop-ups or whatever it is, it's like, great. Now you've got them in Klaviyo or SendLane, whatever platform you're using. And now you can see they're viewing products, they're adding to cart, they're abandoning cart. And then you can also share those audiences back to advertising to also like enrich the meta pixel to say, here's users who have signed up for our email list who visited the site recently, or here's users who have left an email in the last 30 days, who may not be in your meta retargeting audience, but we're seeing a sign of life through this other channel. And let's make sure we're including them in our retargeting audiences. So I think ultimately, when email is done correctly, you actually prioritize first getting customers across the finish line. So it's like, great, like advertising brought us the traffic. Now let's capture as much data as we possibly can. And now let's use generally speaking, what is the least expensive channels, email and SMS, to actually drive that final conversion. And so like a certain percentage of the traffic, you're going to convert cold. They come to the site, never seen it before, they buy. Another percentage of the traffic, you're going to need to nurture over email over the course of 14 days, 30 days, 45 days, whatever your sort of buying periods are. Once a contact gives you their information and they came through via ad traffic, it's much more affordable to basically like remarket to them over email than it is to basically like find them again, via some advertising audience 3 months later. So you can kind of capture that intent and work them down the funnel. And I think that's really like, you want your flows, your automations, your campaigns really set up. I would say in most cases, again, depends on the brand and subscription products and whatnot. But in most cases, I spend probably 70, 80% of my time in e-commerce email thinking about how do I get someone to make their first purchase as opposed to how do I get them to make the next purchase?
Yeah. One thing I see on Twitter a lot with email marketers is they're posting about the creative of emails, right? And it's like these great visuals or like, they're talking about copywriting. However, I feel like there's a lot more that actually drives success that's kind of hidden. So deliverability, how these flows are set up, going deep into the, retention data, understanding, basically what's a signal where someone's likely to make another purchase, understanding the balance of, the volume of emails you're sending. I know it's a constant issue. Clients don't like it when you're sending high volume, but generally higher volume works. So what's that kind of trade-off there? Because I feel like everyone talks about the creative content of email that's being sent, but they don't actually talk about all the ugly plumbing that's a little bit behind the scenes, but actually I believe is significantly more important to do right.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think by far the biggest lever, barring the fact that you're facing any issues with like deliverability, like assuming that you're landing in the inbox, most of the time, 98, 99% of the time, the number one factor in the performance of any type of email marketing and SMS marketing for that matter is basically going to be your segment or the trigger for the automation and like, what's the quality of that segment or that trigger. So a lot of like more basic email marketers will set things up based on time windows. So let's just say like they've opened an email in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, for example, which like I view that actually as like a proxy for how many times have they opened versus how many campaigns have they received. Like that's actually the fundamental version of those segments, which is you can build segments where the definition is literally, I've sent them 3 emails and they've opened at least one. I've sent them 10 emails, they've opened at least one. Or I've sent them 10 emails in the last 7 days and they've clicked on one, right? You could build these like really tight pockets in your segments. And we've done this even for like non-e-commerce brands where we'll build essentially like direct response sales segments with similar definitions to that. And you're just straight up sending sales emails and your open rates will be like north of 80% sometimes because the quality of the signal that you're working with is so high. And I think kind of a parody to that in the automation space is basically what's the quality of the intent trigger that's firing the automation. So like if, an abandoned checkout automation is typically going to have much better open rates, click rates, conversion rates, and revenue per recipient than a welcome series, for example, right? Welcome series is usually in the top 3 or 5, but in most accounts that are properly set up, is usually like abandoned checkout is the number one producer in terms of total revenue and revenue per recipient. And that's because, somebody who's interested enough to put a product in their cart and then for whatever reason they left the site, that intent signal is such a higher quality than you just punched your email into my pop-up. And so I think basically that's like the qualitative factor. There's a lot of technical work that goes into like building the right segments, but I think what's often left on the table is the qualitative work of really putting yourselves in the shoes of the recipients and thinking, okay, you build a segment and you think, if I'm somebody who's in this segment, how high intent am I for purchasing or repurchasing or whatever the particular goal is for that email? That's the type of thinking that at least in my view, drives the most revenue is you're thinking, okay, whatever it is, let's say you're launching a product and you're like, well, who's the most likely to be interested in this specific product? And how do I use the data that we have at our disposal in the CRM or in Klaviyo, in the ESP to build the exact right segment of people who would actually be interested in this product launch, like as an example.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess we'll move on to the next question here. So, how can media buyers work better with email strategists and also to the creative team that's setting up and creating the ads for media for, digital advertising, and also too, how can email marketers be less siloed and how do they basically collaborate better across the business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways. I mean, I guess the 2 big ways that I see as critical collaboration between departments is essentially content and audiences. Like those are the 2 big categories. So on the content side, I think that there should be almost constant communication about, hey, this is our best performing piece of advertising creative. And like not every piece of advertising creative makes sense on email, but 9 times out of 10, you can come up with a version of that would work on email. And odds are, if it's crushing against like a large audience for advertising, it's going to do well against your email audience. So I think that type of communication is critical. I also think that's true for organic social. Like that's something that I've seen work really well in my experience is, if the social media team has come up with some kind of campaign and it's actually effective at engaging the brand's community of customers, then that type of content, you should figure out how to do crossovers to email and vice versa. Something's doing really well on email. Could that be a social campaign? Could that be an advertising retargeting campaign? There's lots of ways to look at that. And so just making sure that you're sharing data about, there's the Pareto principle, right? Of, if you launch 100 ads, 2 of them are going to be by far and away, maybe one of them, like the best, right? They're going to be the biggest producers. And so I think the most efficient way to collaborate on content is for each channel that a brand is leveraging to drive sales, repurchases or not. You basically want to see what is the 1 or 2 things that's like really working this month, and then how do we, apply that to other channels to drive up the aggregate success of the ecosystem. And then on the audience side is pretty simple because most of these platforms have direct integrations. It's just most of the time the brands don't actually set them up. And so even like those segments I was just describing of like, let's build a super duper high intent email audience where it's like we have all these signals of customer intent in email. How can we share those with the advertising team for retargeting? And that's also like, I'll let you speak to like what you think is maybe like productive in advertising, but I think at minimum, it's like, it's worth blending those audiences into retargeting audiences 9 times out of 10, because you're collecting signals in the kind of the email space that you may not have in the ad space. And you can use that to kind of share across.
Got it. What about in terms of customer data, let's say customer lifetime value, how you're recognizing what customers are converting on email that might have come through a pop-up? You spoke to this earlier, but ads drive a lot of traffic. Campaigns might not look great from an advertising perspective. However, those people that have come through a pop-up actually might eventually become good customers. How many ads-based, add to carts actually converted over an email? How does that work? How does that collaboration work? What are your recommendations around the communication there?
I think that really just comes down to the brand priorities. If their priority is customer acquisition, then and your pop-up is converting at a decent rate. So let's say your pop-up converts 5% plus, then you basically I think it's worth incorporating email in sort of like dials that you turn on ads where it's like, okay, let's just say hypothetically, like you're running a cold traffic campaign that's maybe like break even ROAS, but you might find out that if you pull email in from, or if you pull data in from the email side, it's actually producing like a 1.5 or a 2 because that traffic is converting on email a decent amount of the time. And so I think this is really goes to like, if the brand's priority is customer retention versus like really aggressive, like basically like even customer acquisition or profitable acquisition, that kind of changes the dials that you might turn or like what kind of information is relevant across both email and ads. And so, I mean, that's a really long-winded way of basically saying it depends, but frankly, that's what it is. And so I think that really just comes down to like making sure all of the departments are on the same page about, okay, let's just say Black Friday is coming up, right? So it's Black Friday. Is our priority profitable acquisition? Or if it's like, let's say hypothetically, it's a subscription product, do we want break-even acquisition and like a lot of new email addresses in our database that we can convert with like a holiday promo or a New Year's promo or a Labor Day promo, right? And so you have to basically get your hands dirty with the data, or you need like a really powerful attribution tool that can incorporate data from email to actually be recognizing all of those different touch points across the different channels. And then once you have that information, you can be making decisions about how you want to allocate your spend based on the performance of those prospects across the different channels.
What are some of these attribution tools that could be used?
I mean, the big ones that I know about are Northbeam and Triple Whale. I think those are definitely the biggest ones in the space. But I'm sure there's a lot of other, I know there's a lot of Black Crows popping up. Honestly, you're probably deeper in the attribution space. You could probably speak better to that than I could.
Yeah. I mean, we look at it purely from more of a cross-channel basis, specifically within ads. But, in terms of tying it back to email campaigns or drawing the connection between, let's say, a email that was submitted through a pop-up but driven by a meta ad, we don't really look at that as much. It's actually kind of hard. So yeah, just curious about how that works from purely an email perspective.
Yeah, I think with a good pop-up, you should be able to shovel in at least like UTMs via hidden fields. And so like if you're like when you're setting up your pop-up, you should be able to pass through, for example, if the UTM source is paid traffic from Facebook, you should be able to store that in Klaviyo. And then you should be able to then analyze the data later on to say, okay, how much of our cold traffic from ads is actually signing up on email and then buying a month later, hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
And then you can start to develop a more comprehensive model. So like, there's definitely ways to get attribution where, like, some of the more advanced pop-ups can auto-populate the kind of the source. If it was like a referral source, SEO, email, or ads, etc., and then like which channel. But even if you don't have that, you should be able to set up hidden fields and at minimum like log the UTMs. And then if you don't have UTMs log, you can basically assume it was direct or organic traffic and then start to slice and dice your data from there.
Got it. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. So if you could speak frankly to a brand, what would you tell them about email and text marketing? And it's basically, what's the thing you wish you could say, but you can never say as honestly as you could? So just to speak into an imaginary brand and think about it in the terms of, let's say I'm a client and I'm like, email doesn't work. Email is pointless. Like we're driving all of our customers from ads. Revenue we're generating from email is just a fraction of what we're doing from ads. What would you say, like, especially with this kind of misconception around email?
Yeah, I would say like it basically just comes down to I'll go a couple different directions and they'll
And
be somewhat.
remember, speak frankly. So
Yeah.
imagine you're saying is, I'm a client, you're speaking as honestly as possible. Don't do a sales pitch, just tell me exactly what you think.
Not a sales pitch, but I think if I was going to say like the most unashamed version of my feedback, it's that if your website sucks or your supply chain is broken or you keep ordering the wrong inventory, yeah, an email program's not going to fix that. Like an email program can only amplify a functional business with good COGS, basically. If you have good margins, your ad traffic's healthy, your supply chain is on lock. Like if you have your business set up so that marketing can succeed, then marketing will succeed. But I would definitely say that there are some brands out there where they say email doesn't work. And it's like, well, we can't email your way out of buying the wrong inventory. Like that's not a thing that exists. It's impossible to email your way out of that problem. On the flip side of that, I think there is a sense in which, like, let's even take like I think what it would be a great example of a brand that might say email is not very important to us. I would view that as a high AOV, low repurchase rate brand. So let's just say like mattresses, for example. Let's say you sell mattresses, they cost $1,000 and, maybe your best customers are coming back once a year to buy a mattress, if not less often than that. And so you might a brand like that might say, hey, our advertising spend is effective because we have high margins, we have a high AOV, the advertising works, but it doesn't really make sense for us to invest in email. I would say that it does make sense to invest in email, but your entire email program should be designed around reducing CAC and optimizing acquisition. And so it's like, yeah, it doesn't make sense for your email program. It doesn't make sense to send emails 3 times a week that say, hey, would you like to buy another mattress? It's like, probably not. But you could definitely design an email program around, hey, we have all of these different levels of intent of people who have shown interest in purchasing, who are not purchasing for whatever reason. And how can we use email to get back in front of those prospects in order to drive acquisition? And so if in a case like that, it would be, at least in my view, 90 or 95% of the email program would be designed around acquisition and reducing CAC.
Yeah.
That being said, if it's a low AOV and a low repurchase brand, let's just say you sell a $150 product that never breaks, which is always a huge mistake in CPG. You want your products to wear out and break all the time so that people have to keep buying them.
Or be consumable goods, right?
Consumable goods, exactly.
Yeah.
But let's just say hypothetically that's the case. If that is the case, then I would basically say it probably doesn't make sense to hire an agency to build you an email program, because an agency is going to try to charge you a premium and bring in a bunch of experts. And your email program may not actually be that profitable in that scenario because, if you're making, let's just say hypothetically, your gross profit on an order is like $70. And with advertising, you're spending like 40 of those dollars acquiring customers on ads. So you have like $30 to play with, and then some agency wants to come in and charge you like $8,000 a month to run an email program. That doesn't make sense. What does make sense is buy a course and give it to your team, or bring in like a low-cost freelancer who might charge you $1,000 a month and who could basically deliver disproportionate value in that scenario. Then it makes sense. So like I think an email program always makes sense. I think what changes based on different business scenarios is how much should you actually be spending on that email program or that SMS program across the platform fees, the service providers, the different tools that you're using. It's very, at least in my view, it's very dependent on AOV, repurchase rate, gross margin, things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. All those things are pretty similar with ads. Like they have to have a good business model. Like that's why I say ads it's a tool to amplify what you're doing or accelerate what you're doing. Not going to create the business for you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So you've been working with a client for about 3 months and they tell you it's not working, shut it down. What the hell are you doing? Why do they typically say that to you? And then what's your misconception there?
Well, they don't say that to me, but if I were to imagine a scenario in which
Yeah.
that were the case, I think that really goes back to like the business model and the attribution, and then also like what's the work that's being done on email. Like, and I'll say this. I mean, I'm throwing a lot of agencies under the bus when I say this, but realistically, like, when you hire an email agency, the bulk of the work is going to happen in 2 or 3 months. If they're going to build you a dozen automations and like set you up on a campaign cadence and like optimize your templates and improve your deliverability, once those things are done, it's fairly easy for a brand to take that in-house and basically just keep the engine maintained, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that's like, if I were a brand owner, I would basically hire expert email marketers and then fire them 3 months later. And then like have whoever's running my social media, like just make sure we send like 2 campaigns a week. That's probably your cost optimization. That being said, if you actually have like good business intelligence, you're actually optimizing your ads, you're actually driving a lot more traffic, then it does make sense to at least have someone, in-house or not, spending a decent amount of time thinking, how do I optimize this pop-up? How do I support this promotion? How do I support this product launch? How do I optimize this campaign? Or like this, if you're going to run a particular promotion for a period of time, and then also like coming up with promotions, that are designed specifically for email and SMS. I think once you reach a level of scale, which is somewhat brand dependent, but let's just say once you're doing north of like 10 million, I think it makes sense to basically have someone who's pretty much spending their entire time just thinking about your email and your SMS programs. You can make disproportionate value. Like back when I was an in-house guy working at an 8-figure beauty brand, even just an attributed revenue, the brand was making a 30x on my salary. Like it was very, very profitable for them. And their channel revenue grew by 5x, just like having me in the business. And so I think it becomes worth it at a certain point of scale. So like if you're early in the journey, maybe pay someone like a basic fee just to like set you up with a lot of good basics. If you're like way through, maybe hire an agency to come in, like optimize a bunch of stuff like your email collection. And then even outside of things like segmentation, automations, et cetera, the biggest factor in the growth of your email revenue is going to be how fast does your list grow. So like, are you using pop-ups? Are you using tools like Revenue Roll or Retention.com? And are you using them in ways that are smart and effective? So figuring out what are the different growth channels, it should pretty much be, once you have the automation set up, you've got a cadence of campaigns going out. Basically, whoever's doing your email program should spend almost all of their time thinking about, how do I make this list as big as humanly possible? Because that's what's going to build the most leverage in the business and in the list itself.
Yeah, it's funny. I know you've talked about this before, and maybe you want to speak to it for a couple minutes. But I think with everything that's happening in digital marketing, in terms of privacy, especially post iOS 14, owning your audience and owning your customers, at least the data for those prospective customers, there's much of like I would say your addressable market in terms of like at least email addresses and contacts, I think is incredibly valuable because ads is you're renting attention, right? So you're paying to deliver an ad for a second, and then that's kind of it. And then you need that person to make an action. And then once that, you pay for it, it goes away. And you're not going to engage with that person again. unless you pay for it again. Whereas email, you have that contact, you can reach out and engage with them, as long as they stay on your list. Do you want to speak to that for brands, like really recognizing or need to recognize the importance of just owning their audience and engaging with them over longer periods of time and trying to make that as big as possible in order to effectively really monetize it in terms of like selling your products?
For sure. I mean, I think actually a great example of this is when I was in-house at a large e-commerce brand. I was there right when the iOS 14 updates happened. They slashed their ad spend by like 66%. Like they cut most of what they were spending on ads. And then we basically just made our email program more aggressive. So we started sending more campaigns, more automations, obviously keeping an eye on deliverability and engagement. But it was like we wanted to make up for that revenue as much as possible with the owned audience channel. And because we'd spent like a year and a half leading up to that change, building a massive email list in the millions for the brand, we were actually still able to see net revenue growth. Like the top line continued to grow, even though they cut their ad spend dramatically. And this iOS 14 update kind of threw a wrench into things, at least for a little while, for a lot of these brands. So in that sense, it's like building your list and making sure that your email is being optimized and not neglected, like true equity into the business itself.
Yeah.
And when I say true equity, I also mean in scenarios like if you're trying to get acquired or if you go bankrupt, the size of your list and the quality of your list typically is like actually a factor in the business valuation itself.
Yep.
Versus advertising is purely an expense on the books that goes up and down. And so in that sense, it's like that's why I push so many brands to think about it early and often, where it's like it's an incredibly important channel for multiple reasons. And it's like one of the ways that you can actually turn your business into a real data asset.
Yeah. I think it's, for me, based on the volume of spend we manage and the amount of traffic we're driving, you want to try to capture as much of that value as possible. And so if you're using tools like revenue roll or retention or having really good pop-ups, it's common kind of metric, conversion rates on prospecting campaigns are like 2 to 4%, right? So 98% of people are going to hit that site, not make a purchase. Maybe some of them will add to cart. But it's crazy because that traffic kind of washes in and then it washes out, right? It leaves. But with these tools, you can still capture that data, you can capture that information, and then you can reach out to those people again. It's not like they're gone, right? And if I was running an e-com brand, I would definitely have one of those platforms in place to be capturing that data and building that list. Because at least, those people have shown interest in clicking on the ad. And the way like Meta at least is set up, where they're purchase-based objectives on these campaigns. So these people have some intent to go make a purchase. It's not like they're kind of just randomly clicking on ads. So, you do have a little bit of signal already with just some visiting the website. So if you're capturing their email address and being able to reach out to them through these email campaigns, you're not losing all that value. You're spending so much money on to get those people on the website, at least.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say too, like a big part of where I see money getting left on the table in email, outside of just most accounts I look at, they're missing like at least 6 or 7 automations that, at least in my view, are like baseline requirements. So there's that.
Yeah.
But apart from that, a big part of maximizing your promotions is also understanding buying cycles of different types of customers. And so let's just say hypothetically, you've got a decent email guy, but he pretty much, like, the largest audience he might hit are like contacts who have purchased or engaged with the brand in the last like 6 months or so. But let's just say it's Black Friday and you're like, well, if a bunch of people bought from us Black Friday last year, when are they most likely to buy again? Friday this year, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to be really thoughtful with what's all this data that we have on hand. And then, what are strategic ways that we can be building and using segments within our database? It's like, it might even be somebody who was there to, maybe they bought a mattress, but it's been 3 years. It's like, you should probably send them an email, see if they need another mattress, right? And it's just you want to be really backing out of a customer experience of like, what's the product? What are the promotions? How did they come to us in the first place? Like, did they buy regularly? Did they buy during a promotion? And then strategically, like, sending that content out to different types of customers based on the data that you have available. But to your point about just building the email list and the importance of it in general, if you don't have the list or if you don't have the data, then you're missing out.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Okay. So I think that was it for questions. I want to give you a little bit of time to pitch if you want to. You want to just give us a quick rundown on what is Forward and what you do, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Sure, that's easy. I mean, I think what we do at Forward is we scale newsletters for 75 cents per subscriber with an exact audience match. That's the entire pitch. If that sounds interesting to you, then you could just visit forwardnewsletters.com. You can hit the little grow now button and you can talk to me. So if you're interested in that, just visit forwardnewsletters.com. Otherwise, I'm all over the internet talking about all kinds of stuff related to email marketing and SMS marketing. So if you just punch my name into Twitter or LinkedIn, I'll pop right up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Al.